Hi everyone. When I first started this channel, my aim was to elucidate that human rights, animal rights, and environmentalism are one and the same, hence my channel header. I dove into topics like intersectionality and white veganism, and made many videos calling out conservative and centrist vegans, especially for insisting that we should keep politics out of veganism, ironically while inserting their politics into veganism. I'm saying all of this for those who just stumbled across this video and assume that I'm some sort of centrist white vegan who is totally unsympathetic to the idea of decolonizing veganism. I think there's a valid critique to be made of vegans who uphold capitalism and other systems of oppression in their animal rights advocacy. However, this short that I'm going to be reacting to is not an example of a valid critique. It definitely falls into the category of woke anti-veganism.
I keep getting told that my products are unethical because I use leather, or people messaging me asking me to use vegan leather instead. And y'all, please stop. It is not more sustainable or ethical to use plastic over indigenous processed deer hide. If you want to live a life filled with environmentalism, then you need to look towards indigenous people, practices, and products. The vegan movement is so focused on the no animal rule that they're forgetting just how racist they're being. And I see indigenous creators getting harassed all the time when they eat meat. But I have never seen any commentary from vegans about the polymer clay earrings, the plastic earrings that pollute the environment. Did you know that indigenous people make up 5% of the population, but are responsible for 80% of the Earth's diversity of taking care of the environment? 80%. If you're vegan, that's totally fine. Go you. But please stop with that holier than thou act. Please start decolonizing your veganism. Start actually learning about what is sustainable, what is ethical, and why colonization has infiltrated the vegan movement so heavily. It is well known that the vegan movement is incredibly racist. It's well known that the vegan movement is more set on harassing people rather than actually being sustainable. If you can't appreciate the materials I use and why, then please don't buy my products. I'm never gonna use vegan leather, so please just stop asking me.
This person's entire argument rests on a false dichotomy. The only alternative to animal skin is plastic, apparently. I had to look up exactly how indigenous populations process deer hide, and was surprised to learn they use a process called brain tanning. That's right, the brain of the animal is mashed up into a paste and pressed into the skin. It's left out to dry in the sun and then it's smoked. Compared to pleather, this is arguably more sustainable. But is it more ethical? People often conflate ethical and sustainable, so let's define these terms. Sustainable simply refers to a practice that can be maintained at a certain rate or level. Ethical refers to a practice that minimizes harm to sentient beings. Obviously, there is some overlap here, because unsustainable practices inevitably cause harm to sentient beings. If something is unsustainable, it's therefore unethical. However, not all practices that are sustainable are ethical. Murder, assault, and child abuse can all be done sustainably. Depending on the method, committing a genocide could have a positive impact on the environment. That doesn't make it ethical. So while you could argue that the production of pleather is unsustainable and therefore unethical, it doesn't follow that brain-tanned deer hide is more ethical because it's more sustainable. Outside a survival context, producing leather, no matter how eco-friendly the process is unethical because it causes unnecessary harm to sentient beings. Some indigenous populations are living in a survival context where killing animals is justified. However, Aurora bird here is not living in this context. Circling back to the false dichotomy they're presenting, pleather is not the only alternative to animal skin. There's the option of buying secondhand leather or pleather. There are also tons of innovative vegan leather options such as pineapple leather, cactus leather, mushroom leather, and my personal favorite, cork leather. I found this secondhand cork leather bag on Poshmark. Isn't it pretty? Before we move on, I do want to note that while Birdie is specifically referring to brain-tanned deer hide, people often make the claim that leather in general is more sustainable than vegan leather, as evident in the comments on this very post. Real leather, if cared for, will last generations. Vegan leather will be unusable within a matter of years. Leather lasts, man. Vegan leather is terrible for the environment and literally falls apart in like a year, so you gotta go buy more. This belief is so widespread that it's accepted at face value. I highly recommend watching this video by Tofudog, dispelling the myths about leather. To be durable and long-lasting, as leather is touted to be, it must be tanned, because as Tofudog points out,
I'd like to take a moment now to point out, in case someone's missed it, that the entire point of the tanning process is to take an organic material and turn it inorganic. We are taking something that is designed to decompose and making it so that it does not decompose. Natural to unnatural. It is literally a preservation process to stop it from decomposing. Not to mention the finishing process, which ends up with a lot of leather being covered in a thin layer of plastic.
people view leather as superior to pleather because it's natural. But in what sense is chrome-tanned, plastic-coated leather natural? The vast majority of leather products are chrome-tanned because vegetable tanning is a time-consuming process that results in leather that is stiff and sensitive to wear and tear. Brain tanning is also time-consuming and labor-intensive. The commercial tanning process is incredibly harmful to the environment and workers, polluting waterways and causing cancer. And regarding durability, not all vegan leather is cheap and flimsy. High-quality vegan leather lasts a long time. My best friend has worn these vegan docks for nearly a decade. Alright, let's move on to their accusation of racism. They say, if you want to live a life filled with environmentalism, then you need to look towards indigenous people, practices, and products. The vegan movement is so focused on the no animal rule that they're forgetting just how racist they're being. What's hilarious is this person is not indigenous, and their post is a direct response to vegans criticizing them specifically for their use of leather. They are using the oppression of indigenous people as a shield for their behavior. This is the identity fallacy by proxy. To suggest that indigenous people are oppressed and therefore criticizing an indigenous person equals racism is stupid enough. But to make the leap that criticizing a white person for using animal products is racist because indigenous people do it too is next level stupid. Animal exploitation is a universal practice. Vegans are not singling out indigenous people. But even if leather production was a practice unique to Native Americans, it's not racist to oppose a specific practice on the grounds that it causes unnecessary harm. FGM is a practice that is done in majority Black and brown countries. It's not racist to oppose this practice. Birdie asserts that it is well known that the vegan movement is incredibly racist. And their evidence for this is vegans quote-unquote harassing indigenous creators for eating meat and using animal skin. But of course, they don't actually provide any examples. Given the lack of examples and the lack of nuance displayed here, I think it's fair to be skeptical of their perception of what counts as harassment. Criticism is not harassment. Please watch my video on bullying and harassment. Anyway, I'm not saying that you can't find examples of vegans legitimately harassing indigenous people. But I don't think these incidents add up to the vegan movement being incredibly racist, or heavily infiltrated by colonialism. Like, yes, there are racist vegans, but to say that the vegan movement is incredibly racist implies that vegans are uniquely racist when compared to the general population. The data we have on vegans shows that most of us fall on the left side of the political spectrum. Vegans are statistically less likely to be racist than the general population. Obviously, liberals and leftists can be racist, but I think it's fair to say that we're comparably less racist than conservatives. The irony is that Birdie is playing into the racist ecological Indian stereotype, the idolized portrayal of Native Americans as inherently more connected to nature. Perpetuating racial stereotypes, whether positive or negative, reinforces racism because it's a form of essentialism. Essentialism is defined as the view that categories of people, such as women and men, or heterosexuals and gay people, or members of ethnic groups, have intrinsically different and characteristic natures or dispositions. This is the basis of racism and other forms of discrimination. We can highlight various indigenous ecological philosophies and practices, and acknowledge the contributions that indigenous people have made to the environmental movement, without mythologizing them as ecological heroes. Indigenous people are people, and people are fallible. Anthropologist Shepard Craig explores this in his book The Ecological Indian. While many Americans are attached to a romantic, idealized view of the human relation to nature in North America prior to European contact, Craig attempts to examine what characterized actual Native American beliefs and actions. Native Americans had a vast and impressive store of knowledge about the natural world, but like everyone else, couldn't always foresee the consequences of their acts, and didn't always act in the way they believed they should. Nor were their beliefs always perfectly adaptive to changing circumstances. The ecological Indian addresses such fascinating questions as, were Pleistocene-era humans responsible for the extinction of large mammals like the mastodon? Did the Hohokam of Arizona destroy their society by over-irrigating and ultimately over-salinating their crops? What role did Native Americans play in the near extinction of the deer, the beaver, and the buffalo? How did Native Americans use fire? Was the natural Eden that awed the first European visitors a feature of native environmentalism, or just of very low population density? With all that said, it's evident that the majority of modern-day Indigenous people are environmentalists, just as the majority of Black Americans are Democrats. This is the result of the centuries of colonial oppression they faced. They are the first to face environmental injustices due to their lower class status, so naturally they're on the front lines of the environmental movement. The statistic they cited that Indigenous people make up 5% of the population but protect 80% of the Earth's diversity can be explained by this, and the fact that they have a lower environmental footprint due to being disproportionately poor. And also, the fact that many Indigenous populations live in tropical rainforests, which are hotspots of biodiversity. This statistic does not suggest that they possess sacred ecological wisdom that should not be questioned. My point is not to diminish the efforts that Indigenous people have made in fighting climate change, but to show that not everything they do is inherently eco-friendly. I agree that we should listen to Indigenous people and uplift their voices, but we shouldn't take their philosophies and practices as gospel. Indigenous hunting and fishing practices may have been sustainable for small populations, but they are not sustainable for the current global population. Moving on, I want to address their plea for vegans to stop with the holier-than-thou act. This is what is known as a thought-terminating cliché. According to Wikipedia, a thought-terminating cliché is a form of loaded language, often passing as folk wisdom, intending to end an argument and quell cognitive dissonance. Its function is to stop an argument from proceeding further, ending the debate with a cliché rather than a point. Some such clichés are not inherently terminating. They only become so when they're used to intentionally dismiss dissent or justify fallacious logic. Examples of thought-terminating clichés are "God works in mysterious ways" and "stop politicizing a tragedy." These common expressions serve to stifle critical thinking and shut down important discussions about religion and politics. When carnists say things like "vegans are so self-righteous and judgmental" and "stop pushing your beliefs on people," they aren't bringing an actual argument to the table. They're being flippant and dismissive. In this regard, vegans are no different than activists for any cause. Activists across the board are fighting for a cause that they believe is righteous, and their aim is to spread the message and persuade others to join them. Naturally, they will have judgments of those who dismiss them and fight against them. This is true for trans rights advocates, Palestinian rights advocates, etc. I wonder how Bertie, a non-binary person who is a vocal supporter of Palestinian rights, would feel if they were told to stop with the holier-than-thou act when speaking up for trans people or Palestinians. Surely they would recognize that this is not a valid argument against their position. They then make the plea to start decolonizing your veganism and start actually learning what is sustainable and what is ethical, which is rich considering their conflation of the terms sustainable and ethical and their ignorance on the topic. The idea that veganism is a form of colonialism is laughable. Like, can you even define the words you're using? From Wikipedia, colonization is a process of establishing control over foreign territories or peoples for the purpose of exploitation and possibly settlement. Veganism is the practice of abstaining from the use of animal products and the associated philosophy that rejects the commodity status of animals. In what sense is advocating against the exploitation of animals colonizing? How is pointing out that cultural tradition is not a justification for violence colonizing? Explain yourself. And I have to briefly comment on this because I can anticipate people in the comments pointing out how condescending their tone is here. Like, please start educating yourself on what is sustainable and what is ethical. What irks me is not their condescending tone, but the fact that they're wrong. Condescension is on a spectrum. I think a lot of people don't actually have a problem with a little condescension if they agree with what is being said. Or they only register condescension if they disagree, or if a person they agree with is being extremely condescending. I am well aware that I'm a bit of a snarky bitch on this channel sometimes. It would be hypocritical of me to call out Birdie for being condescending when I am matching their tone. Me saying, "Can you even define the words you're using?" is condescending. I used to have a guilty conscience about it, wishing I could be more like Earthling Ed. But then I realized that many content creators I admire are a little condescending sometimes, and that's honestly why I love them. I think a sprinkling of condescension is what makes people funny and entertaining. The world would be fucking boring if no one was ever condescending towards dumbasses who need to be put in their place. So I will give Birdie a pass for being condescending, and instead focus my critique on what they're actually saying, which is ignorant nonsense. After watching this TikTok, I thought to myself, Birdie seems like the type of leftist who thinks Islam is a religion of peace. And then, I kid you not, I stumbled upon this post.
I just started reading the Quran and I am so excited about it. People thought when I first asked that I just wanted to read it out of curiosity, but I want to read it to study it. I started following somebody on social media that teaches the Quran and hosts a Quran book club for Muslims and non-Muslims, so I'm really excited to start going to that. She was describing the chapter of the bee and that just blew my mind. Like the way that she describes things, the way that the Quran describes things actually makes sense to me. And also, did you know that Allah is beyond gender? Did you know that actually scholars believe that there are two Qurans, the Quran of nature and the Quran, the actual book? And did you know that each chapter is named after a natural phenomenon? I don't know, this whole book is just blowing my mind and I am so excited. I got sticky notes so that I could mark out things that I was drawn to, and I'm not even through the first chapter and I already have a bunch of sticky notes. I'm definitely gonna have to buy more tabs. I'm honestly having a whole revolution with myself where the way that I describe the universe and the things that I believe in are actually described in the Quran of believing in Allah. And I've never thought that I believed in God before, and now I'm really having a revolution of self of, I think I actually believe in God. If you've been curious, I really recommend it. There are a lot of people who are converting. There's a lot of people who are reading it. I'm not saying I'm going to convert. I'm not saying that I wouldn't. And I don't know. I know that this is exactly what I need right now. I just wanted to say thank you and just point out how excited I am.
This is genuinely disturbing. They are sanitizing a book that is explicitly anti-feminist. They're pinkwashing Islam.
Please stop.
For anyone curious about the Quran, I highly recommend checking out the Skeptic's Annotated Quran. The original text is all there, but it highlights contradictions and stuff about women, homosexuality, etc. Click on Good Stuff and you'll find 73 quotes. Click on Cruelty and Violence and you'll find 546. The parallel between these two TikToks is black and white thinking. The world is divided into two groups, the oppressed versus the oppressors. Indigenous people and Muslims are oppressed, therefore they cannot be oppressors. Through this lens, the beliefs and practices of these groups are good and noble. But this is not how the world works. People are complex and capable of being both victims and victimizers. Black people can be homophobic. Women can be racist. The fact that Muslims are being slaughtered in Gaza does not negate the harm caused by Islam. The fact that indigenous people were slaughtered and displaced and still face oppression to this day does not negate the harm they cause by killing animals for the sake of tradition rather than necessity. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up and let me know what you want to see next. Alright, peace out.